You're listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, editor-in-chief of CraftsmanOnLine.com, and he's back to join us once again. Brother John Nagy, welcome back.
Thanks for having me once again, Brother Michael. It's an honor, privilege, and I deeply, deeply appreciate you having me come almost every 2 weeks at this particular point.
It just made it easier that way for both of us. No, and I enjoy having Brother Nagy on as well. Of course, you know, he's a member of the Pearl of the West Masonic Lodge number 146 in Newport Richey, Florida, and the Florida Lodge of Research, a 32nd degree Mason, 2014 recipient of the Dwayne E. Anderson Award for Excellence in Masonic Education, and also the author of the Building Better Builders series of uncommon Masonic education books, which we're going to be dipping into one of those books on our program tonight as we talk about the whole story. And what's interesting, this does talk about a hole, but I think a lot of us are thinking there's no hole or pit in a Masonic story, like in the ground. No, we're not getting into that. We're talking about one of the most misunderstood terms in our Masonic ritual, and that is Cowan. And I think a lot of brothers, when you hear the term Cowan or eavesdroppers, there's like that cold, icy, almost fear factor that goes into you. And I was studying through the ritual books to find out why we have that association with Cowans and eavesdropper. Can you make any connection to that as well?
Somebody early on in the Grand Lodge era did some research, very, very shoddy research, and came across a skirmish that was occurring in the Scottish area. The Shaw statutes mentioned something about Cowan, so they thought they would lace it into ritual, not knowing that the word Cowan was literally being written down in all the different secretary log entries for meetings, that there were indeed Cowans that were part and parcel of the craft being paid master's wages. And literally, we're talking about well into the 1900s. And if you look at operative Masons today, they've got Cowans. They're called drywallers or dry dikers. And there's actually an organization of drywallers across the pond, and probably some here in the United States that are part of that organization. They're operative, they're masters at their craft. They just don't square their work, and they don't use cement that they put together themselves to build their walls. And some of their greatest works are still standing all over the place.
We're going to get to that, because I'm sure a lot of guys are like, wait a second, I'm in construction, I'm a contractor, I've hung drywall before. Does that make me a Cowan? And why is there an officer whose job in a lodge is to stand outside the door to make sure I don't come into the room or overhear what's happening inside? So let's start first with the term Cowan and eavesdropper. It's always interesting to me because it makes me think of like a Batman goon that he has to fight, or an army of like evildoers that's out there. And I was, like I said, I was really studying the ritual to find where the negative connotation would come to it, and why we have the Tyler, who has a drawn sword and is standing outside the lodge room door and is supposed to ward off these people. You brilliantly explain kind of the history of the word, but do you know anywhere in our ritual where it says a Cowan or an eavesdropper is a negative entity?
The only thing you'll see either here or across the pond is references to our particular, this side of the pond. The majority of the rituals refers to them as Cowans, whereas across the pond they're referred to as intruders or pretenders. And of course, as the pollination of both sides get intermixed and jumbled, Cowans are referred to as pretenders to the craft. They're not real Masons, but the fact of the matter is they are real Masons. And again, I'm talking about the operative craft, not the speculative. In the speculative craft, you'll find that the influence of the speculative definitions has actually spilled over into the dictionaries of the profane. And in the profane dictionaries, it's referred to, particularly in Scotland, as a term of contempt, a term of derision, and a term that when you use the term, you were insulting. But it wasn't always that way. And individuals who are Cowans were actually members of the craft, and they were literally written into our notes and our meeting minutes. And I've got a whole bunch of them that I could refer to. I have a PowerPoint where I go through maybe 5 or 10 minutes of meeting minutes of various lodges over hundreds of years where, oh yeah, he's a Cowan, he's a member, and he was entered and he's a Cowan. And the biggest problem is that we as a speculative craft don't understand consistently that we are symbolic. And you have to understand what a Cowan really does in order to understand how it is symbolically applied to our craft experience. The Tyler is out there to make sure that no brother enters who doesn't square his work and doesn't build with cement, AKA doesn't build with love. So that applies to whether you're a member of the craft or considered a legitimate member of the craft or not. The Tyler's job is to keep off individuals who do non-squared work. Why? Because our speculative craft is built on the premise that we are square masons, not rough masons, which happens to be the alternative word of Cowan, dry diker, or drywaller. A rough mason is a mason who builds edifices without cement or squaring their work. And you see these works all over the place. Cowans supposedly don't build with binding agents, and they don't square their work. So as a consequence of building edifices like this, there's a lot of holes, crevices, and hollows within these structures. And the term Cowan is actually a bastardization of the word Cowaner. The true name of a Cowan is a Cowaner. And why do they call them Cowaners? Because they make holes. Literally, when they build, they make Cowans, or shall I say hollows, in what it is that they put together. In fact, there's a really neat phrase: we bring our heel to the hollow of the other foot. And you can literally swap out the term hollow with Cowan and say, we bring the heel of the right to the Cowan of the left. Somebody who knows what the word Cowan means literally would say, oh, that makes sense. I know exactly what he's referring to. So
we don't encourage anybody to do that in ritual.
Yeah, we really don't. You don't want to change up anything that's being said, but if it were slipped in there, they would know what it meant. And so when you're instructing a candidate to beware of Cowans and eavesdroppers, you're really not telling them to be aware of pretenders. You're telling them, watch out for individuals who don't square their work or build with love, because they're not going to contribute well to the craft in any way, shape, or form, other than doing exactly what they've been asked to do and understanding that no love needs to be involved and the work doesn't have to be squared. And in that respect, we have a lot of individuals in the craft who can meet that particular definition. They keep the doors open, they pay their dues. Just don't ask them to square their work. They're not interested in squaring their work, and they're not really interested in that brotherly love and affection either. They just want to come in. They want to have the experience of being with brothers. None of that brotherly love and affection or squaring their work. They just want to sweep the floor. They want to serve dinner. They want to even play Tyler or play a part. Just don't ask them to square their work, and don't ask them to build with brotherly love and affection. It's just not on their radar. And they're perfectly happy receiving whatever wages that they are going to be receiving, whether that just happens to be companionship or participation. And I know a lot of brothers like that. Now, will I insult them by saying they're a Cowan? No, I won't do that unless they want to start getting into a philosophical discussion about how the word can be applied to people within and without the craft. But other than that, because the word has been so ingrained into our culture as a derogatory term, I tend not to use it unless I'm in a philosophical discussion, and only then. And the person that was hearing the philosophical discussion description, they'd have to basically apply it to themselves. If the shoe fits, wear it.
Right. No, I appreciate that your context comes from a place of love, literally. And as we're learning here, and you're describing that modern day Cowans exist in the craft, I started closing my eyes and thinking of some of these brothers who have tremendous big hearts. They're some of the greatest brothers I know because they do those tasks that many of us like, hey, we got to take the trash out before the end of the meeting tonight and close the door and lock things up. And he's already done that. This brother has already jumped on that, or has volunteered to sit outside of a lodge room as a tiler for the last 5 years and has not participated in any degrees, but still comes and, the proper attire of a master mason and is there. And I've always wondered, what do you get out of attending the meetings, sitting on that side of the door for this amount of time? To me, that would almost seem like a punishment because I want to be in the room where the discussions and the action is happening.
I can tell you there are times when I just want to find an excuse to be alone. And good God, if I was playing a part of a tiler, that my thoughts would be interrupted every once in a while. Hey, I could do that. Some of my greatest times have been driving down the highway for 11 straight hours with no radio, no music, no conversation, just me and my inner voice having a blast. And if a person wants to sit outside the door and be a tiler and they find great complacency with that, hey, God bless them.
And now I think we're making that connection for brothers that stumbled across this podcast episode title and saw the whole story. Where does this exist in Freemasonry? The next question is, well, if there is a hole, whether it's one on the floor, in your mind, in a building structure, is it possible to fill that hole and square that work? So the question here is, can you help enhance a Cowan?
Okay. It all presupposes or is predicated upon whether the individual wants to square their work and wants to build with the cement of brotherly love and affection. If they want to, it's just skill. That's all it is skill development. And that can be done with any concerted effort. If they don't want to, they're perfectly satisfied with the wages that and the level and skills that they have. And again, God bless them. That's what they want out of it. And that's what they want to put in it. There's that old phrase, you get out of Freemasonry what you put into it. And if that's all they want to put into it, well, we need to respect them and honor that and support them in exactly what it is that they want to put in and contribute without pushing them. Now, if you have an individual who comes up to you and said, hey, I want to learn more about this, that, and the other, which is a loose way of saying they want to square their work and they do want to get involved with that cultivation of cement between brothers, very easily taught. The skill development is practice, practice, practice. And if the individual is motivated to improve their ability to square their work and build with cement, there are plenty of opportunities within the craft to do just that. It's internally driven. You can't beat somebody into it. They have to come to it on their own. So in answer to your question, the answer is predicated on their motivation. If they are motivated to move from a rough mason to a square mason, the road is wide open. All they have to do is take the steps. If a person is not motivated and they want to be exactly where they are, rough, we still have places for them. We still have jobs that they can do. And We're not going to expect square work from them, but the job doesn't demand square work. So why would we want to push them further?
Right. As we're having this discussion, and I don't want anyone to take the thought that we have the position that, Cowans are not on the level of being a Mason, that they're sub Masons, and that they're in our lodges, and they are contributing. And just as they can learn from us, we can also learn from them. I just want to tell this quick story of, there's a particular brother in my jurisdiction. I'm not going to use his name because I know everyone in my jurisdiction will know immediately who I'm talking about, but he would take the bus to so many meetings, or to lodge meetings in the old 17th in the Albany, New York area. And for many times, if he did not show up, we would not be able to have a meeting because nobody would want to sit outside the door and be the Tyler of the meeting. And you could always count on him for that. He was the guy that went down in my mother lodge, or in my home lodge, he would go down, and he was the guy that at 9 o'clock would get the pizza from the delivery guy and make sure that, and, set up the after the meeting festivities that we would have. And it took a certain level of dedication. And I'll tell you, when he was not able to attend lodge and eventually stopped coming to lodge, we missed him because we had to find somebody and rotate that responsibility, that this is the role that he would provide. So I just wanted to share that story, because we, as Master Masons, and as you're saying, Brother John, like, we shouldn't fear, we shouldn't have any negative feelings towards Cowans. And if they come to us and they want to learn, just as we want to learn, we should reach out and speak with them. I do want to get to that part of ritual where we are told to, guard our lodge meetings. And this is a bit of a serious one, where as a Master Mason, we do have to protect ourselves. And we live in this era of technology. And it has not happened to me directly yet, but I know when you put yourself out there in digital spaces, you start to get probing questions from people that are trying to gain Masonic information unlawfully. You've been doing this much longer than many of us. Do you have any tips for Master Masons when it comes to protecting yourselves from those ruffians that are trying to get the secrets?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the secrets of the modes of recognition. That's universal. You have some jurisdictions that say, well, if it's written down in cipher, that's secret. That's considered esoteric, and that's considered secret too. But the universal aspect is, whether it's in cipher in any one particular jurisdiction or not, it's not universally in cipher. I literally have a book from several jurisdictions with everything written out except for the modes of recognition. So if I'm ever accused of revealing secrets, no. Here, you see, this book is written out. I said, oh, that's an exposure. I said, no, it's from the jurisdiction of this state. But I'm not referring to our jurisdiction ritual or their state ritual. I'm referring to ritual in general. And as far as the modes of recognition, just don't share them. It's a good way of keeping off the radar. The other thing is that there's nothing that I share that I think of as a secret. I read up about Masonry long before I became one. I read all the exposures. I read a lot of the ritual books that were handed to me prior to it. So I knew all this stuff beforehand. Now, so I made a promise that I wouldn't talk about it. Well, talk about what? The only thing that I remember during my particular initiations, 32 times over at this point, is that I promised not to share the modes of recognition. And so I don't. And I don't talk about the modes of recognition. I don't go into details about them. If somebody brings it up, I said, we're not in a closed lodge room, so therefore, why even bringing it up? If you run into somebody who's curious about the craft, I have no problem referring them to books. In fact, referring her, because I get some females also looking to be involved in either female craft or co-masonry. I refer them to their jurisdiction, and I have absolutely no problem doing it because the principles of what I call the program are sound and anybody can follow them. It doesn't make a difference what lodge you go to, as long as the lodges are respecting the principles. We have yet another soul on earth that is following the path that is going to bring them closer to God. So why would I want to hinder that? I just won't sit and lodge with them. And that's all I'm required not to do. So when you're talking about going back to Cowans and eavesdroppers, the technical term for Cowan in my jurisdiction is somebody who's not a Mason trying to get into the lodge. That's the way they defined it. But I also know the historical and symbolic representation. And my outer Tyler wants to make sure that I don't have anything false enter into my personal lodge. So I keep off that which is not willing to be building with love, or that which is not square. I don't let that enter into my personal lodge. And the other thing is, my private thoughts don't need to be overheard by somebody who would take that information and use it for detrimental purposes. So that covers the eavesdropper. So symbolically, it's a way of saying, don't speak in such a way that you're going to be overheard by people that really shouldn't be hearing. And don't let anything enter into your life that is unsquared or not building with love. Straightforward symbolism. Right. And it's one of the things I believe is greatly missed in communicating with candidates. This is the stuff that you really want to be communicating, because it's all about personal discipline. It's not about keeping somebody outside the physical lodge room, which does apply for meetings, but it's all about the symbolic representation of how you're supposed to conduct your life and the disciplines you're supposed to be developing, so that the life that you live is going to be a little less hassled.
Yep. Well, the unicorns around the campfire in me. Whenever I see the brother whose job it is to, or role or responsibility is to sit outside of the lodge meeting with, that drawn sword, it makes me think, like, we take this so seriously. If they only knew on the other side of that door, we could be talking about the roof that needs to be fixed, the parking lot that needs to be repaved, building maintenance, whatever. But I need to guard myself, as you're saying. I need to guard the secrets of Freemasonry, and I need to think of that physical presence of the Tyler in me as well. So I'm glad we've had this conversation, and the role of the Tyler and the description of the Cowan and the eavesdropper. Another thought that I had about this was, I know you said that, eavesdroppers, they do have, a negative context, but sometimes we also need to be mindful of the fact that a Cowan could also be an entered apprentice or a fellow craft that could accidentally witness or perhaps overhear a Masonic secret before they should be revealed to them.
I've talked about the 7 liberal arts and sciences in front of an apprentice or two, and quite honestly, it's not a secret, and it's not revealing anything that is foreshadowing an upcoming degree. If the apprentice has got any kind of mental aptitude, they've already made the connection with the great books of nature and revelation. There's no way on God's green earth they're going to be able to study those books unless they study the 7 liberal arts and sciences. So it's like, why are we getting so hyper about talking about 7 liberal arts and sciences in front of an apprentice, when the ritual itself indirectly points to the very thing that they're going to have to study eventually if they want to be able to design their spiritual building? So you've got some people who are, oh, that's in ritual, so therefore that's in the 2nd degree, so therefore you can't talk about it. And there's a lot of things in the 2nd and 3rd degree that we can talk about with apprentices. The only thing is, how paranoid are you about having somebody point their finger at you saying, oh, that's in the second or third or fifth or, 32nd degree. So therefore you can't talk about it. And I'm saying, well, I didn't say it was in the ritual. I'm just talking about it in general and applying it to the first degree. You got these books you're supposed to be reading. How do you think you're going to do that soundly and professionally? You got to study. What are you going to study? Well, it'd be really good if you studied grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Not necessarily in that order, by the way. How paranoid do you want to be? Well, it all depends on who's in power and how abusive they can be with their particular understanding of what it is that we're supposed to be adhering to. The fact of the matter is, if they overhear certain things, so what? The main reason for not sharing anything ahead of time is so that you don't tell the individual reading the murder mystery that the butler did it.
Mm-hmm.
What I would ever reveal to any individual going through the degrees would not damage their experience. It would enhance their experience. And you see, this is the problem that I see going on with a lot of protecting the upcoming candidates. If you don't say anything and they go into the ritual, they have no clue what it is that they're experiencing, then they got to explain it on the back end. And it's like, when did that happen? And what did that mean? And if you go through an experience and you don't understand anything about that experience whatsoever, how profound is that experience going to be? I'll give you a typical example. If an EA had read the book of Ruth and had a great discussion about the book of Ruth before they entered apprentice degree and talked about the significance of the shoe, and they talked about the story behind the shoe and what it signified within the culture of the time, when that shoe is handed over from them to the brothers, it's going to have a whole much more richer experience for the candidate than had they been told after the fact. If the brother was told that they are entering upon holy ground and talked about scripture, the significance of why shoes are removed when entering on holy ground, and that the lodge room literally is symbolic for Mount Moriah and its holy ground, how do you think they're going to experience that degree? Opening the door, coming in, and they're stepping on what they've been told is holy ground. They're going to have an entirely different experience.
Mm.
And there's so many things that we could share with candidates before they even knock on that door that would enrich and enliven their experience of the ritual that they're going through, but we don't do it. We not only don't do it beforehand, but afterhand, we give such just absolutely rudimentary instruction that the heads are scratching because none of it makes any. I mean, the lectures themselves are filled with a whole bunch of illusions and Easter eggs and hyperlinks. But unless the individual actually knows what all the stuff within ritual is referring to, it goes in one ear and out the other. And it's like years later, they say, oh, that's what the shoe means. Or, wow, that's that's the significance of the cable toe. And that's the significance of the ladder. And that
right.
So much opportunity is missed. So when there's this attitude that, oh, the ritual is the experience. And the fact of the matter is, if you're going through an experience and you're blindfolded and you don't understand half of what is being said, how rich is the actual experience? And then it's only afterward that you start getting bits and pieces of what this symbol means and the significance of that reference and what have you. I'll give you a typical example, and I keep on bringing this up. During the staircase lecture, when the individual says, from a point to align to a superficious, to a solid. Well, that's directly out of Plutarch's E at Delphi. It's Greek philosophy. Preston took a piece of this lecture that Plutarch was speaking to his students at Delphi. He sewed it in ritual so that if you were privy to Plutarch's writings, you would immediately recognize, hey, he's referring to Plutarch's E at Delphi. And by the way, there's at least one other writing that talks about a point to a line to a superficious to a solid. It's not just Plutarch. So if you're well read in Greek philosophy, you're going to be picking up on all this stuff. And that is only one of a multitude of references that are sprinkled throughout ritual, and candidates haven't a clue.
Right. And I think that, as we kind of surmise the whole story here, I think that is when you look at there is a hole in our craft when it comes to Masonic education. And unfortunately, because of the way that things are in these modern times, we have brothers that are going through the degrees that really aren't learning all of this, that are then somehow conferring degrees, obligating people and raising them to the sublime degree of Master Mason. And when it comes to that point of asking the questions, there's no one there really to give you the answers. And I would say a handful of those guys start looking for books, YouTube videos, sources to get that Masonic education, and they find it. And that's why it's there, because there's brothers who are leaving the breadcrumbs to the light trail for others to find it. So I totally get what you're saying, and that we as a craft have kind of created this hole in the story in ourselves.
We have indeed. The craft ritual and process is filled with holes, aka Cowans, hollows, and they're not smoothed over because, well, the way that we bring candidates through is under the guise of basically we're trying to get them to a Master Mason level, learn the proficiency so we can plug and play them into ritual to bring in the next wave. And it's unfortunate, but it is the will of the craft at this particular point. And every once in a while, you have a candidate come through that says, that's not good enough. I want more. And that's where you and I step in, and we start providing them light, the light that they really should have received from the very beginning. And very much like you had indicated, how do you educate a Cowan? Well, the first thing is you got to find out if they're motivated. And if they are motivated, you start introducing them to the light that helps them square their work and start building with the cement that they want to be building with.
This has been the Craftsman Online podcast. I want to thank again my guest this week for coming on, Brother John Nagy. Thanks for coming back on, Brother John.
Thanks again for having me, Michael. I'm looking forward to our next connection. And until then, be well and take care.
We will. In 2 weeks, we'll be drawing distinctions between operative and the speculative here on CraftsmenOnLine.com, where new episodes of our podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.
You've been listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.